Here, read this.
Woof.
So, in January of this year, it was announced that J.K. Rowling is no longer the best-selling English author. She has been overtaken by Julia Donaldson, author of The Gruffalo, who sold 2 million more units than Rowling in 2024, and as of January this year, 2025, she has sold a total of 48.6 million copies of her books. That is all according to the Bookseller. I actually learned of the news in the Literary Review. There was a very entertaining diary piece by Joseph Hone, who, with the important qualification of being a dad, declared that Julia Donaldson is simply better than her peers. I love a direct assessment like that. It reminds me of Bridget Brophy. She said something very similar about Jane Austen. But anyway, Joseph Hone went on to detail some of the reasons for Donaldson's fantastic success, some of them quite amusingly practical. It might seem an obvious point at first, but people just keep buying them. Not only because they're popular, but because they're given to 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds who rip them apart or eat them, necessitating people to go and buy another copy and another copy. It's also worth mentioning that if you have a 3 to 10-year-old in your life and you want to buy them a book as a gift, because it's a gift, you're very unlikely to buy a second-hand copy, and it would reflect pretty badly on you if you were to give a 3 to 10-year-old a copy of The Gruffalo that looked as if it had passed through a Gruffalo's digestive system. And the first-hand bit is important because all of these numbers about book sales are collated by BookScan, the Nielsen system, which registers ISBN sales. So every time you buy a new book on Amazon or a new book in a bookshop, that gets registered by Nielsen and that classes as a sale. If you go and buy a second-hand copy of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone from a second-hand bookshop, that does not get counted, obviously. As a side note, the eating and squelching of Gruffalo books offers Hone the tangent of talking about Alexander Pope, who he says was a very unusual toddler in that rather than defacing books, when he was given second-hand books that had pages missing, the precocious little twerp would actually write new manuscript pages and supply damaged books with his own writing. And then Hone's other reason for the popularity of Donaldson is, as he says, her rare ear for metre. She is, says Hone, perhaps the most commercially successful English poet since Tennyson. And this rather marvellous idea jumped out to me because of some of my recent reading on Kenneth Grahame. Late on in his life, Grahame wrote an essay called A Dark Star, which recorded how some of his mid-Victorian peers felt that Tennyson was the last word in poetry. Grahame recounts a meeting with Palgrave, who was a poet, but also the compiler of Palgrave's Golden Treasury, very famous anthology of English poetry, who was asking Grahame who was worth reading nowadays. Should I read Stevenson? Should I bother with people like Dylan Thomas? And I think Grahame gave a good account of those modern poets. But Palgrave was not convinced and said for him that his interest in English literature ended with Tennyson. So it's a shame he couldn't stick around until The Gruffalo. Instead, like a wimp, he died in 1897. Because when you think about it, it's not hard to imagine The Gruffalo. Once you picture it removed from Axel Scheffler's illustrations, it's not hard to picture The Gruffalo collected in treasuries like Palgrave's, or perhaps a collection of children's poetry. It has a Lear-like anthropomorphizing of animals. It has a Dahl-like sense of nastiness, owl ice cream and scrambled snake and so forth. But also it has the swagger of an authentic folk story. It makes no effort to be timely or relevant or to teach, really. In fact, it is quite amoral in a way. The hero, the little brown mouse, lies his way out of trouble. His lies are so potent that they body forth in the shape of a Gruffalo, true to every lying detail that the mouse has provided. And instead of this being a sort of grim-like reversal or a sticky end, to get out of trouble, the mouse lies again. Having manifested the Gruffalo, he informs it that his favourite food is Gruffalo crumble. It's an art story, jolly with the pleasure of its own creation, advertising how making something out of nothing leads to having your cake and eating it.